These are people who are uber rich. There are a few African Americans who have made it to that tier, but compared to the number of whites in the 1%, they are literally a percent of the 1%.
So why is the 1% so white? It has to do with something called the racial wealth gap.
For every dollar of wealth held by the typical white household, the typical African American household owns only 6 cents of wealth.
6 cents, you heard right. So how did we get here?
When you think about wealth, you have to understand that it's generational, that wealth left over generations actually compounds and builds and grows. African Americans were held as slaves and they weren't allowed to earn any income. They weren't allowed to own things at one point in this history, and that actually has contemporary effects.
In the United States, the unemployment rate measures the number of people actively looking for a job as a percentage of the labor force. When it comes to employment in the past, it used to be that the white adult male would get a job and the woman would stay at home, as that was the quote-unquote the norm. But that has changed with changing times. This isn't new news, but it is important to know how societal norms have come to change over time. With the glass ceiling conversation, unemployment has always been an ongoing issue in the US, but by race, it is an entirely different story. Chinese immigrants are the third largest foreign-born group in the United States. Chinese migration to the US picked up during the mid-19th century when primarily male manual laborers arrived in the West Coast for mining, railroad construction, and other low-skilled jobs. While the current stereotype for Asian Americans is that they are smart and are hard workers, they used to be perceived as marginal members of society. Because Asian Americans are not considered to be an underrepresented minority, they are given little priority or attention to diversity programs, which can result in unintentional neglect. Obviously, to get a job, you need an education. For example, Chinese immigrants are 12 times as likely to have graduated from college than Chinese who did not immigrate. It is important to acknowledge and be aware that Asian American does not describe one particular race, as there are many different national origins, and that the ethnicity that I represent is not the only one who is hindered during the employment process.
Many minorities, especially in New York, have faced many problems and barriers when trying to find a job to provide for themselves and their families. I'm going to talk more about Latino and Latina immigrants who came to New York for a better life. The group of immigrants that I will be talking more about is people from the Dominican Republic. Immigrants from the Dominican Republic mostly come to the East Coast of America because either they have already family in the East Coast or for better employment rates that the East Coast has to offer. One of the biggest cities in the East Coast today is New York. Actually, 47% of the Dominican Americans live in New York. Many Dominicans live in Manhattan or the Bronx in cheap, affordable homes, and in the past 10 years has surpassed the Puerto Rican population in New York. Many of these immigrants are forced to live in horrible conditions like small apartments and projects. Many Dominicans don't know English because in the Dominican Republic, the native language is Spanish. The Dominican Republic also is a third world country where education is not really emphasized unless your family could afford it. Many of Dominicans who are living in poverty in the Dominican Republic are usually the ones coming to New York for a better life. Because many can't speak English, it makes it harder to make connections and find jobs. Some are then forced to work hard labor because many do not have degrees or anything to follow upon. Many Dominicans are then tricked by businesses and are put to work longer hours and sometimes paid less than minimum wage because they lack knowledge of laws and rights. Many Dominican parents that live in projects and small homes in New York City are always working countless hours to provide schooling and food for their children. Parents struggle to teach their children anything because they are tired and most don't have time to study the English language. Many kids who live in the projects get stuck in the drugs, gangs, and violence that surrounds them and drops out of school due to the lack of support and motivation. Employment then starts to become more and more difficult for these immigrants and their families because of the situations they are put in when they first step into America.
Earlier in the year, it was released that black unemployment had hit an all-time low. This being achieved under the Trump regime, Trump publicly took to Twitter, taking credit that he doesn't deserve for job growth, according to many economists who view the continued growth since the middle of 2009 as the primary explanation for the recent hiring. More important, there are multiple signs that the racial wealth gap is now worsening, and the administration appears to have done little, if anything, to specifically address this challenge. In an interview with Professor Derek Hamilton of the New School in New York City, he stated, "To identify a single indicator of employment as an indicator of economic health is at best incomplete. It is intentionally deceptive to focus only on that indicator." Examining the situation further, government data show troubling economic disparities for black Americans. The median net worth of a black household is just $17,200, according to the Federal Reserve. The median net worth of a white household is 10 times higher. Back in 2004, the median net worth for whites was only 7 times higher. The home ownership rate for black Americans has fallen since Trump became president to 41.6%, according to the Census Bureau. The gap between white home ownership and black home ownership is now the widest since 1995. Many believe that education is key for providing the employment opportunities that African Americans desire, but even then, census figures show the average income for a black college graduate is $64,486. This is about $13,000 less than what a white college graduate earns. The average student debt for someone who is black is $32,047, almost a double average for someone who is white, according to a 2016 study by the Urban Institute. No amount of education alters the imbalance. Black workers with a high school diploma take home 22% less than whites with the same credentials.
Just as other minority groups mentioned previously, Haitians are another part of the minority who has struggled to attain proper, equal, and fair employment after entering the United States. Unfortunately, Haitians with a degree in either nursing, police enforcement, doctor, and more would have to reapply and reattain the same degree in America. In this case, this would leave Haitians at a standstill, or even worse, having to work at an entry-level job despite their actual ranking elsewhere. Having to attain a job in America as a minority is already hard enough, but to attain one as an immigrant is even harder. This leads to families splitting in order to reduce cost spending from providing for a whole family rather than just one individual. However, Haitians tend to be ardent individuals who strive to achieve their goals and power through adversities, which is taught through an already difficult lifestyle back home.